What's up, y'all? It's Latashá. This is Topiaview, where we're chatting with the homies who are a part of the ecosystem of Topia. Today we have the incredible legend C.Y. Lee chatting with us about all things on executive producing, patronage, showing up for the culture, and all of that. How you doing, C.Y.?
I'm doing great.
Yay.
Thanks for having me here.
Of course. C.Y., just for the people who don't know you, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, I am, a Gen Xer. I grew up in the era of hip hop and house kind of starting to blow up. My main interest as a young person was, I was in a youth symphony orchestra, learned the cello, spent a lot of my high school career in classical music. Went to MIT for college, got into college radio. Did a lot of mobile DJing during that era. What got me into MIT was really a deep curiosity around technology and software. So I would say ever since then, I've been trying to mash the two together. Starting with a lot of product work at places like Microsoft, Amazon, and Real Networks during the era of streaming media and Napster. So there were a lot of opportunities to see how technology and culture intersected, and I've just becoming more and more intentional about it over the years.
Was there a significant moment in your youth that completely shifted your perspective on art, culture, and tech coming together?
I wouldn't say it was so much my youth. I think I just experienced culture as a youth, as a teen, early 20s. But I think what really made me reflect on it was coming out of it where I saw people thinking about music and cultural elements as ways to reflect on their younger selves. And then actually experiencing that myself as I got into my 30s and 40s, realizing how deeply important this cultural context was in my understanding my own identity and the way I connected with people around me.
Was there an opportunity where you were oh my God, I got to figure out how to give back to culture and give back to music and give back to the arts? Because I feel that's such a huge part of your existence. And when we chat about it, it seems there was a pinnacle that was this is it.
I don't necessarily think about it as giving back. I think when I zoom way out, there's the ideas of paying it back and paying it forward, just in general. And I think the older you get, the more you start to understand what that really means. And one of the major revealing things about kind of reflecting on how I experienced culture and was a part of culture growing up was not realizing that just growing up in culture was part of forming culture. And so, the older you get, the more distant you are from it, because you get a job, you have kids, the standard things that kind of make you an adult also take you away from being part of the core energy of the culture, unless you make it your job, right? But that for me was not an interesting option, because I really wasn't that good at cello or DJing. I'll be real.
But when did you start DJing? First of all, going from cello to DJing is too...
No, it totally makes sense. It totally makes sense.
Does it? Please tell me about this.
Turntable's an instrument, right? I think in so many ways, I didn't really think of it this way because I kind of hated the cello early on. But learning to master an instrument and sort of being able to think in patterns that about the sound you're making and having intention around moving a person who's listening, I think really informs what an artist does. And I think that without that, I wouldn't be able to understand art and artists in the way that I do today. Even though I was probably a shitty artist, it's still having a context to think within where you realize there's stuff in my head that I want to make things, and these things are ways for me to share what's in my head with other people.
Right.
And whether it's a melody or it's a style of playing something or it's a vibe you feel and it's your music selection, those all tie together really tightly as self-expression with intention. And that takes skill and understanding and a bunch of other contexts, which you could talk about it intellectually, but at the end of the day, it's a feeling, and knowing how to express that feeling is a huge part of just being a complete human.
Facts. Was your family in music?
Yeah.
Okay.
So both my mother and my father were pianists.
Oh, wow.
And that made for a very musical household. So both my sister and I came up in classical music from that heritage.
Got it. And so did they push it onto you?
I don't know if I'd call it pushing in the sense that I think both my sister and I were pretty malleable.
Okay.
We would go along with it. And certainly my sister loved the violin. She ended up becoming a professional violinist. Whereas, I was a a reasonably good cellist. Like they let me in the orchestra, which had pretty high standards. But it wasn't a part of my identity the way it became a part of my sister's identity.
What were you listening to when you were a kid?
Honestly, it was mostly classical music. Like
Oh,
I would
wow.
fall asleep to my dad practicing piano. My dad ended up becoming an architect, but most evenings he was grinding on the piano. That was maybe his first love. And so that to me was the underlying, like riding around in the car with him when he was driving me places, was always like classical music. Like
Wow.
it wasn't like a strict classical music upbringing. That was just like the air that I was breathing. I didn't start listening to the radio till like high school.
Oh, wow.
But then I went hard on that. So it's like the depth of understanding of classical music informed how I understood pop music.
Got you. And what was like some of the pop music that hit you?
Like early hip hop, like Run DMC, like that's particularly memorable to me because I felt like a phenomenon running through like the radio, my friend group. It was the first time I felt culture shift was around Run DMC, and the way that they also sort of collided with Aerosmith at that era, like rock and hip hop sort of like having their entree into pop culture.
Yeah.
That hit really hard.
And then were there other like hip hop figures that like came into your life in that time period?
Yeah, for a while, I was really obsessed with UK hip hop.
Oh, nice. Me too. I love UK hip hop.
Because they were picking it up secondhand. You know, at first it was kind of like cringy, like
Yeah.
listening to a lot of what people were doing. But at some point they picked up their own style, and watching that develop was also like super compelling.
Nice. Do you think that the idea of hip hop, house, and dance coming from communities that make out of whatever they had meant something to you?
It was just like the air you breathe. You don't really realize what you have until you zoom out. Culture used to be very much more componentized.
Yeah.
But hip hop is just like all this energy being manifested as, you know, like graffiti, dance, music. They're just all part of one whole.
That's a fact.
Right.
For a long time, I didn't go into DJing because I was a little afraid of it. I can't even lie. Looking at the booth, I was like, this is insane.
Yeah.
But getting into it later, I was like, oh, I'm literally getting to step into almost every form of hip hop, because even graffiti to me is like visual art, right? And so I dive into that in different ways too. And I think that's crucial when you're a hip hop artist, like a genuine of the essence hip hop artist.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, like literally when you learn anything, you're biting other people's styles until you develop
course.
your own. And each of these disciplines is like a venue by which to do that. And ultimately, if you master the art of like mimicking till you find your own style, like you're equipped to really like self-express yourself through your entire life.
Right. Where do you think things fit with AI and hip hop?
I think of it the same way we talk about like the internet. Like
Yeah.
nobody talks about like internet music, but at a point in time there was
Yeah.
internet music.
Right. I remember.
So at some point, it just kind of like what it brings to the table in terms of people able to be able to manifest their creativity just becomes part of the air that the new generation that grows up with it is breathing.
Yeah. That's interesting. I like the concept of like, we were just talking about prior, like how we shouldn't define ourselves by the tools that we are utilizing and like Web3, et cetera, et cetera. But there are so many like time periods where I've witnessed tools be like the genre,
Yeah.
like SoundCloud rap, you know, like internet music. Why do you think as like a culture we do that?
I think it's because it's a convenient label by which to name the next wave of something. Because otherwise, where are you going to get the name from until
That's a
it hits
fact.
the zeitgeist?
So when did the tech implement into your life?
Tech's been kind of like my love. I grew up on Legos. Legos were my shit. And like software was like next level composability of like whatever you had at your disposal, you could smash into something and then play with it immediately.
Right.
And I think there's a part of my brain that just wants to make stuff and play with it. And that sort of defined, like technology is the most malleable palette to that.